Tonight, President Trump rips European leaders that don't support his desire to have the U.S. take control of Greenland. Could this be a death knell for NATO? New developments in the bizarre case of a CPD officer who shot and killed his partner. The officer in question had a long disciplinary record. And could the city buy back its parking meters, sold in a fiasco nearly 2 decades ago?
Chicago will never be done with the parking meter story. Hey, welcome to the Chicago Report, everybody. Schutz here, trying to regain his voice after an incredible, exciting game last night at Soldier Field. Anyway, a who's who of Chicago area political leaders. They're celebrating Martin Luther King Day today with Reverend Jesse Jackson Jr.'s Operation Rainbow Push. The event was held downtown at the Fairmont Hotel. Hundreds gathered, and the theme was building a beloved community. Now, Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. missed the event for the first time in 36 years. His family says he is doing well after recent health issues. Speakers talked about deportations and civil rights protections and food assistance. Dr. King's words came through children and teens carrying his message.
We've seen civil rights protections twisted to defend the privileged instead of righting injustice. Corporations, universities, schools, and museums have been pressured to halt efforts at opening doors of opportunity for all. I'm doing my level best not to call his name.
If militarism and poverty and racism can be eradicated, it's going to require everyone in this room to put the words into action.
Meanwhile, as I mentioned, Bears fans are still digesting last night's heartbreak after yet another miraculous comeback. But the game off the field is heating up. Look who attended the game last night. Here is Speaker Chris Welch, House Speaker Chris Welch of the Illinois House, with George McCaskey and Team President Kevin Warren there before the game. Did they discuss legislation for Arlington Heights? We don't know because neither party would tell me. The lawmakers in Indiana are considering a proposal to own and pay for part of a new stadium in the northwest corner of the Hoosier State, likely near Wolf Lake in Hammond. Now, this adds legislation to give the Bears the ability to negotiate property tax rates on the Arlington Heights property. Has been stalled, a lot of it because of House Speaker Welch, who you saw at the game. Now, on Friday, Arlington Heights Mayor Jim Tenalia urged lawmakers in Springfield to get this deal done, keep the Bears in Illinois and in Arlington Heights, because things could not get any more heated.
These are numbers that are not marketable. They could never finance a project like that. And then if anything were to happen, they could never sell it. There's no buyer for that. So the number has to be tolerable. Just like you would not design your own home or your own office building knowing that your tax bill is going to be out of control, you'll back off and either cancel the project or redesign something smaller. They don't have a choice to redesign something smaller, but they could leave the state.
Mayor Tenalia from Arlington Heights there arguing that the Bears should have the ability to negotiate property tax rates with Arlington Heights, and Indiana's legislative session only goes until February, so things could move fast. And President Trump sends a wild text message to the Prime Minister of Norway, ripping that country somehow for the fact that Trump did not win a Nobel Prize, and further pushing the notion that Europe should support President Trump's desire to have the U.S. take control of Greenland. So is this pushing NATO to the brink? And why on earth is the president so fixated on this? Joining us now is Cecile Shea, Senior Fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Always good to talk to you. Cecile, I think no one could look at this text message from President Trump to the Prime Minister of Norway and not think of it as bizarre behavior from a head of state. What impact does this have on European allies and NATO at large?
Well, you're right, Paris. I tend to be very circumspect when I speak publicly, and the only words that I can find to describe the president's fixation on possibly even going to war over Greenland is insane. I mean, it's absolutely insane. First of all, we would be setting a precedent that a country can take over another country or another part of a country just because we're kind of interested in something that that country has. So then what would happen if Russia decides it wants part of Alaska, or China decides to take Guam, which is one of our territories, or some other country decides to take Wake Island in the Pacific? no other country is then going to support us in protesting or pushing back on that because we did it first. So that's problem one. Problem two, to your specific point, nothing has been more important to the United States since 1945, indeed, possibly in the last 150 years, than NATO. Not only did NATO mean that there was not a World War III in Europe, and remember how many hundreds of thousands of Americans died in the first two world wars. It's meant that Europe could come together and build its economies, which have helped the entire US economy grow, especially the Midwest, where we're so reliant on the export of food and agricultural products, as well as manufacturing, and where so many of our small businesses are reliant on being able to bring products in and components in from Europe and then resell them in the US. And so NATO, which brought peace to Europe and eventually allowed the European Union to develop, that's been absolutely vital to the US. And yes, what the president is doing is threatening. I never in my lifetime thought that I would see the militaries of Britain and Germany and the Scandinavian countries and France sending forces to Greenland, not to protect Greenland against Russia, but to protect Greenland against the United States. I mean, it's just insane. And it is so dangerous, so deeply, deeply dangerous. And really the only people who can rein the president right now are Congress. And they have not shown a lot of courage to do anything like that so far.
It sounds
but
like
it's just vital.
They're MIA right now. Republicans just want to avoid answering questions about Trump. Typical dance they've been doing for 10 years, and Democrats obviously speaking out. But the arguments that Trump makes, says if the U.S. doesn't acquire Greenland, Russia or China will. It's essential to the U.S.'s defense strategy. Is there truth to any of that?
So first of all, many of your viewers who served in the military did tours in Greenland. We already have bases in Greenland. You'll remember that the vice president and his wife visited one of those bases. In addition, and this is really key, we have the right to build more bases in Greenland. We have had an agreement with Denmark since the early 50s to, if we want to build a deeper port for our naval vessels, to enhance our Air Force and other capacities there. And it's because the security of the Arctic is vitally important. So the president could be saying, we're going to further secure the Arctic. We're going to take advantage of some of the agreements we have with NATO. We're going to invite our NATO allies to come in and help us and work with us and be based in Greenland also. But this is not doing that. I mean, we can defend, not can we have a duty to defend Greenland already because Greenland is part of Denmark, which is part of NATO.
Right.
We already are defending Greenland. So that's just a specious argument. It's just a ridiculous argument. And if the president is doing this because he's upset that he didn't get the Nobel Prize, again, why would you go to war to prove that you should have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize? That's illogical. But it's just further evidence that the president is not looking out for what is best for the U.S. citizens, for U.S. businesses, for U.S. farmers, that he's just settling scores.
And you mentioned, the president is also threatened or instituted tariffs on countries that will not support his desires to have the U.S. take over Greenland. But what happens if the president follows through on some kind of threat for some sort of use of force?
Well, then you have from my perspective, you have a constitutional crisis in the U.S. that goes all the way up the line to the military. And this is where it's so dangerous that he has been allowed to put so many of his sycophants and people only looking out for their own interests in the cabinet. And that one of those people, the Secretary of Defense, has fired a lot of good general officers all the way down to colonels throughout the military and tried to put in people who they trust to be loyal to the president. If it was 2 years ago, I would have said, there's no way that that the military would follow this order blindly. They would try to push back. They would try to prevent it. I don't know what would happen now. I don't know what the cabinet would do. The cabinet, at this point, you have to really question the president's judgment. And would the cabinet step in and try to say that, the 25th Amendment prevails? I don't trust them to do that. The only hope, Paris, if he did try to use violence to take Greenland, the only hope would be for Congress to say this is a crime against the Constitution. And I believe it would be. He would be violating a treaty that the U.S. Congress has voted to adopt, and he would be violating the War Powers Act in a way that is just unconscionable. Other presidents have done it, but never to go to war with an ally. So our only hope at that point would be that Congress would step in and say, you are planning a crime against the U.S. Constitution. I mean, I hate to be that melodramatic, but I'm deeply concerned right now. I'm more concerned about this than I have been about anything else that has happened in the last year.
Wow. Well, and it does seem like several of the president's closest advisors want to break up this Western alliance, and they instead see the world kind of in this kind of zero-sum tripartite agreement where the U.S. really only is concerned with the Western Hemisphere, and Russia perhaps with Europe, and China with Asia. But it's definitely an escalation on long-time alliances here. Cecile Shea, thank you so much from Council of Global Affairs. Always good to talk to you.
Always good to talk to you, Paris. Thanks.
All right, take care. And back here on the home front, could the city of Chicago buy back its parking meters? You remember how they were sold from out under the taxpayers in 2008 to much criticism. The city got about $1 billion, and the private consortium that took all the parking money made that back pretty quickly and several times over. But now those meters are up for sale again, and Mayor Johnson is reportedly considering taking ownership back. So how would that work? Joining us now is one of only 5 city council members who voted against that now hated deal back in 2008. 32nd Ward Alderman Scott Waguespack. Alderman Waguespack, I remember it was like it was yesterday. You and 4 of your colleagues were warning the rest of city council, don't go to sleep on this. This is a horrible deal. And of course, it turned out to be true. But does that mean that you support the notion of the city somehow paying billions to acquire the meters back?
Yeah, I guess thanks for having me on, Paris. And I remember that those few days back in 2008 to 2009, and I had projected at the time through an analysis that we did that it was potentially worth $10 billion. Wow. And when you look at this potential sale that's happening right now, so back in June, right after we settled with CPM, and the city was on the losing side of that in the arbitration, we saw what the value of this whole project really has been over the last 15 years or so. I would hope that the mayor, if he were thinking about doing this, and I'm not sold on it that he is, that he would be transparent first about it.
And we have to mention, there was an ABC 7 report that said he is thinking about doing this. I did reach out to the mayor's office. They did not have any comment on the speculation or the story. But if the mayor is thinking about this, how exactly would something like this work, and how much would it cost?
Well, it would cost in the billions. So there's 2 companies right now that have already bid on this deal. Stone Peak and I believe Mechie are the 2 big names that submitted bids, and there might have been a third. What we don't know is if the city, slowed things down or jumped in at the last minute to bid on it. But that bid could potentially be worth billions of dollars. And if it were, and this is the part that I'm not really sure the mayor's jumped into this. If this is an issue that's lingering out there, just come out and say it. Look, we're either considering it or we're not. I'm not sold that he is. It would cost the city as many billions as it would for the other 2 investment firms to bid on this. So the city has no extra rights to this because these used to be our parking meters, all 36,000 spaces. They really are not in it. We are, as taxpayers, are not in any special place here to be able to have an advantage on a bid.
So if the city's going to buy this, would you think they borrow the billions of dollars and then that debt is backed by future parking meter revenue?
Yeah, this would all have to be money that we would have to borrow. And again, as we watch what's happened over the last 3 years, we've had credit downgrades. So that would impact the borrowing that we do. We just had a budget fight that didn't go too well for the mayor. First time in decades that a city council ever pushed back and voted against one of his budgets, a mayor's budget. So look, there's a lot of things happening here. I think if the city's even considering it, put it out there on the table. Let the public know what the cost would be. My guess would be well over $3 billion, more than double to get it back. And there's a lot of other things that could happen with it. But I think the bottom line is here we might be seeing two other firms that are bidding on it. One might get it. And the city really doesn't have a lot of strength to make a lot of changes on it.
So say the city does successfully bid $3 billion, borrows to pay for it. Is there enough potential revenue in the coming years that would pay all that debt back and result in extra revenue for the city? Because everybody knows the city needs to find revenue wherever it can right now.
I think it would, but really that's where you have to see as a taxpayer what the calculations are here. If we're paying billions for it, does it really behoove us to do that and then look at the calculation where this thing goes another 6 decades? That's what we really need to know. Is it worth doing it? As it is right now, we still have a few powers. We can add enforcement personnel. Not a lot of people want to see that. There were things that came out of the arbitration that we are required to do. And we really have to see what the devil in the details are for any kind of plan like this. But I'm not sold that the mayor's doing it.
You were saying back in 2008 that you thought these meters could bring in $10 billion or be worth that. Do we know how much has the city of Chicago lost out on by virtue of not owning them anymore and having all that parking revenue go to this private consortium?
Well, I think in the hundreds of millions, because, when we first looked at it, the quarters in my neighborhood were, it was basically a quarter for an hour to park there.
Right.
We went, when I came in, and doubled it and, to 50 cents. That wasn't a huge issue. When we saw the meter contract go through, obviously things skyrocketed. But I really think that had we kept the meters back then, we would be much more solvent. We'd have the ability to bring in that revenue on an annual basis. When you look at CPM, they made their money back, the $1.15 billion, in about 10 years. And now they have 60 plus years to go. So whether they keep it or they sell it, they're really the ones who are going to benefit for decades to come.
All right, I want to ask you a question about a major development in your ward or near your ward, the old Lincoln Yards site. It never really came to fruition. The developers had planned high rises and basically a whole new community. But now there is a plan from another developer to develop a part of that site and put a public park there. Does that have a better chance of happening than the Lincoln Yards development did?
Absolutely. I'm not really sure what happened with Lincoln Yards. Things didn't go well. There was a completely different plan 7-8 years ago when they were pushing it forward. What we've done here is we went back to the drawing table. We're looking at residential versus all office spaces. We didn't want a car-oriented development here. So yes, there will be vehicle parking, but it's really oriented towards pedestrians and bicyclists. And I think the project just passed the plan commission. So our next step is the city council through the zoning committee and the full city council. And
typically the alderman still enjoys some level of aldermanic prerogative or privilege there. Is that something you would support and have your colleagues support?
Absolutely. This is a huge opportunity for growth on not just the residential and the property taxes that'll come with it, but the commercial properties that'll be activated. And I really think you're going to see that whole area finally start to move forward. It took a lot of work over the last couple of years to really shift to this new idea, but we did it all within a few months and we're moving forward with it. And I'm really happy to see this growth in this area.
All right. 32nd Ward Alderman Scott Waguespack, thanks for talking to us.
Have a great evening. Thank you.
All right, you as well. And when we come back, the bizarre story of a Chicago police officer who shot and killed his partner and why new information cast doubt on what exactly transpired. Right after this. Welcome back. It's a Chicago Police Department mystery that never seems to fully get solved. Last June, Officer Carlos Baker shot and killed his partner Crystal Rivera during a police chase in Chatham. Now, the police department immediately labeled it as an accident, but details have emerged that raise deep questions about the circumstances of the killing and what happened in the immediate aftermath. The Illinois Answers Project now reports Officer Baker was rejected for a promotion before all this happened because of disciplinary issues, and then he was later accepted, and it follows a pattern of disciplinary problems that Officer Baker had. And joining us now is Casey Toner from the Illinois Answers Project. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
First, remind us, set the scene, what exactly happened, and why has so much been so confusing about this incident?
Well, in June, officers Carlos Baker and his partner, Crystal Rivera, who are part of the 6th District TAC team, which operates out of the Gresham District, were watching, and they basically follow 2 men into an apartment building. And they get there, the men are allegedly armed. This is where it kind of gets, it's murky here.
Murky, yeah.
Murky, but what people believe to say, what Chicago police have said is that Carlos Baker sees one of the men. The man is armed with a gun. He's pointing a gun at Carlos Baker. And Carlos Baker trips, or he accidentally fires a weapon, right? And the gun and the bullet hits and kills his partner, Crystal Rivera. And that is the first officer-on-officer death in Chicago police history for the past nearly 40 years.
Wow, so that had never happened in 40 years, or at least not that anyone knows about. But then more details come out because Rivera's family retained a lawyer. They did a civil investigation. They filed a lawsuit. Turns out that Baker and Rivera were romantically involved, but then they had broken up, and Rivera was actually scared and had asked the police department to reassign them because she had feared him. And then it comes out through some of your reporting that Baker had a really checkered disciplinary history. So talk about these complications and why the police department hasn't been forthcoming about them.
Well, what we found with the Illinois Answers Project and our partners at the Sun-Times is that before the shooting happened, Carlos Baker had amassed about 12 disciplinary complaints. And that puts him in a very small section of police officers. And some of them were very small. He had one complaint from his first day, but then some of them were very serious. And when he was still a probationary employee, he had met a woman that he was trying to date at a bar who was there with another date, and Carlos Baker allegedly flashed a gun at them. And that's a very, very serious allegation. And these complaints, and that complaint was made at a time when he was probationary, and he could have been fired immediately, and it never happened. And
it's the kind of thing you think on probation, so when you're probationary, you don't have to go through it's very difficult to fire a police officer, so you don't have to go through all those steps if you're on probation.
That's correct. I mean, you could have been fired, then and there.
And he wasn't.
And he wasn't. And, honestly, no matter if it's true or false, there's a wide latitude to do things at that point. And they did not make that decision. And so that was one of the first big stories we wrote about it because, the past is prologue. And, sometimes by looking at, people's history, you can, paint a picture that, helps bring people into the present.
And then your most recent article came out late last week that it's along those lines that he had been rejected for a promotion, I believe, and then he was later accepted. The chief of patrol went back, reversed it, and then accepted him, despite this disciplinary history.
Yes, and this is for the tactical team, and these teams are, these are coveted positions within the police department. They're often stepping stones to promotions. And in these jobs, they are going after people with guns and drugs. That's often the mission of tactical teams. And the first time he applied, the chief of patrol, John Hine, rejected his application because of discipline. And at that point, he had the blessing, Carlos Baker had the blessing of his commander, Michael Tate. And a year later, Carlos Baker picks up another complaint. And, we don't know exactly what happened, but his second application was approved. And meanwhile, this complaint was pending that he had cussed out one of his sergeants. It was a complaint for insubordination that was later sustained.
And has the CPD ever given you explanation for how he had passed his probationary period, how he had gotten this promotion to the tactical unit despite all these complaints?
CPD has not been answering a lot of our questions. Before any story runs, we generally send them, questions so they have an idea of what's happening and then they can get back to us. But in this case, we didn't really get much of a statement. Chicago Police says, not Chicago Police, the Fraternal Order of Police says that Baker, the first time he was rejected, it wasn't for discipline, it's because he didn't have the 3 years that he needed to get that job, 3 years of being a police officer. But the memo we says discipline. And the next memo we have says that he got the job.
So some mixed messages there from CPD. Are you planning to continue to follow up on this? I know there is a lawsuit, the families filed a lawsuit. Do you expect to learn more about this situation?
Oh, sure. We plan to follow this as more and more stories come out, as we learn more and more things. Because I think a lot of people in Chicago have a lot of questions about this. Again, the first officer-on-officer death in nearly 40 years. And, part of the problem is that there's these two defendants in this case who allegedly had the guns and the drugs, and a judge in the case is saying that they cannot release the body cam footage. And I think that if the judge did release it, and we've challenged the judge to do it, that a lot of these questions would be answered.
All right, so we're going to have to follow that. If there is some way to get at that body cam footage, I know this has been talked about in the police department, a lot of questions, a lot of speculation here. Casey Toner from the Illinois Answers Project, great work, great reporting, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
And thank you for being with us on this frigid night. Stay warm, everybody, and we're back tomorrow at the same time. Good night.